And again, conservatives in this country do not like it when there is socialist agitation, because after all, the idea is about human rights and immigrant rights. Now, the sit-downs were especially dangerous to the system because they were not controlled by regular union leadership. And in Chicago, on Memorial Day of 1937, the strike at Republic Steel is going to bring out the police, and they're going to fire at a mass picket line of strikers, killing 10 of them. And the incident took place in what was called the Little Steel Strike. And today in labor history, it is known as the 1937 Memorial Day Massacre. The incident arose after U.S. Steel signed a union contract, but smaller steel manufacturers like Little Steel, including Republic Steel, refused to do so. And in protest, the Steel Workers Organizing Committee of the Congress of Industrial Organizations called a strike. So on Memorial Day, hundreds of sympathizers gathered at Sam's Place headquarters of the Steel Workers Organizing Committee. And as the crowd marched across the prairie towards the Republic Steel Mill, a line of Chicago policemen blocked their path. And when the foremost protesters argued their right to continue, a tree branch was tossed at the police lines and the police fired on the crowd. And as the crowd fled, police bullets killed 10 people and injured 30. 9 people were permanently disabled and another 28 had serious head injuries from police clubbings. No police were ever prosecuted. The coroner's jury declared the killings to be quote-unquote justifiable homicide. And the press mostly called it a labor riot or a communist riot. And ultimately 50 people were shot, of whom 10 later died. And 100 others were beaten with clubs. And those that died were shot in the back as they fled the police attack. Now let's go take a look at a documentary that was produced by the Illinois Labor History Society back in the 1950s as they're attempting to understand this massacre.
A view of the Millgate entrance at 118th and Burley, showing evidently some police, some scabs, some company personnel in the background. General view of the South Chicago plant of Republic Steel Corporation. And some of our pickets marching in front of the plant gate. A very limited number, as you can see.
Sam, that's such a shocking film. There must have been a real public outcry.
There was, but at the same time, this film that you've just seen was suppressed by the police. The public press, that is the newspapers, tended to support the Chicago police. They looked upon it as a demonstration that warranted the bloodshed by the Chicago police. However, we had had some similar incidents on the evening of the 26th and the 28th of May at the Republic Steel plant in South Chicago, where, again, our pickets had been beaten by police billy clubs, and we were anticipating that they might do that same thing today. That's the reason, for example, you saw in there some of the cars with a Red Cross sign on it were there to help carry any injured who may have been beaten. However, none of them really anticipated any serious incident or any shooting that took place. Consequently, the whole thing was a real tragedy. When the police had their grand jury investigation by the coroner's committee, they marked it down as justifiable homicide. The police alleged that our members were under the influence of marijuana, and that because they had marched across the field that day chanting CIO, CIO, that this was an indication that they were under the influence of dope.
This film shows so much police brutality, it's hard to believe that it would occur like this there before your eyes.
Yes, I think if you examine the film very carefully as it's being shown, you can see many of the police with drawn guns firing. You can see the strikers running away from the police line, trying to avoid being injured or hit by the police.
Tell me something about the people who were killed. Were they Republic Steel strikers?
Well, it's interesting, Les, to remember that of the 10 that were killed, there was Leo Francisco, a Mexican, Anthony Taglieri, an Italian, Lee Tisdale, a black, Joe Rothman, who was born in Bavaria in Germany, Sam Popovich, I assume, is a Croatian, Alfred Kazi, who came from Alabama. Kenneth Reed, a farm boy from Iowa. There were 30 other victims of gunshot wounds, and there were 60 others who were clubbed or beaten.
Well, you mentioned that lady from Hull House.
Yes.
What was her testimony again? That
Miss Marshall, Lupe Marshall, testified that when she was thrown into the paddy wagon and to be hauled to the police station, that they were normally you accommodate 8 passengers in the paddy wagon. She counted 16. Many of them were thrown in on the floor between the seats, and they were piled on top of each other, wounded, bleeding. And she testified before the Senate Investigating Committee that one of them down at the bottom of the pile, who was very visibly in very bad condition, asked for a cigarette. She lit a cigarette and put it in his mouth. It fell out of his mouth. "Thank you, that's all right," he said. And she said his eyes glazed and she could tell that he was dying right then and there.
well, you said that the film was suppressed. What do you mean by that?
It was suppressed by the police. The Senate Investigating Committee had to subpoena it in order to have it appear before the LaFollette Committee, who conducted an investigation of the Memorial Day incident.
Well, then this really must have been prime evidence in that hearing.
It was, and the Senate Committee also indicated very clearly that the long white clubs that were used by the police, the tear gas that was used by the police, evidently had to come from the properties of Republic Steel Corporation.
How did they get to that conclusion?
There was no tear gas issued by the regular police department that day, and anyone can see very clearly that these were not regulation police billy clubs. As a matter of fact, the police had been housed, fed, clothed, and billeted inside the plant gates by the Republic Steel Company, and the police had been there even before the strike had begun.
What about the strike itself?
Well, we, for all practical results, lost the strike, and it took us 4 or 5 years before we achieved our first collective bargaining agreement with the little steel companies.
So you did make a comeback.
Oh, we did make a comeback. We did not stop fighting. We fought to maintain the union and to conduct local union meetings and continue to organize and to use all of the available legal means that were present to finally vindicate the position of the right of the American working men and women to have a legitimate, bona fide trade union of their own choosing. Our union wasn't handed to us on a silver platter. We had to fight for it every inch of the way. That there were a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into the building of this organization. And that as long as we have laws that govern the relationship between the employer and the members of the union, we must constantly be on the alert to protect those rights. The right of freedom to speech, freedom of assembly, the right to peacefully picket. And there's one adage we should always remember: those who forget the past are destined to relive it.
All right, welcome students to the folks who brought us the weekend. Of course, here we are working on the weekend, but nonetheless, we're losing our weekends, but welcome. A Mexican, an Italian, a black, a Bavarian, a Croatian, an Alabamian, a Southerner, a Midwestern farmer. They died in that massacre. They died so that we might have it a little bit better today. An 8-hour day, can you imagine that? Overtime pay, can you imagine that? Social Security, can you imagine that? Workers' compensation. They died so that we could have a little bit better life. They died so that we could have a weekend. We must honor them. That is the 1937 Memorial Day Massacre. Now, they fought for something larger than themselves, and there's a woman that's very important, an immigrant woman. Her name is Luisa Moreno.